All right, this is my next project. This is a commissioned piece, so client custom. They want to have this lightened up, so we're going to be stripping it. It's a really interesting piece, obviously very well made. This is a hooker, solid. This thing weighs a ton, but the top is very interesting because it's not smooth. It has ridges. This has kind of lots of inlays, kind of like parquet crisscross, and then some really interesting burled wood. And it is distressed intentionally. Of course, it's got all the little wormwood holes. It's been distressed on the edges and things. The hardware's going to stay because it's beautiful, but it's going to be an interesting thing stripping it because of all of the details in the top. And then to lighten it, the client would like it lightened without doing a whitewash. So we're going to be doing some different techniques to see how light I can get it without doing any whitewashing on it or tan washing of any kind, just to see how much we can lighten the wood itself. So that's going to be, maybe oxalic acid. It's going to be bleach. I've got some wood bleach products, and we're just going to try a few things to see how light we can actually get it. So it's going to be an interesting one. And she was good with me, trying a few things to see what we could experiment with and how light we could get it. So it's going to be kind of fun. I like trying new things, and so follow along to see how this one comes out. As always, the first thing we got to start with is the hardware. I really like this hardware. I'm glad that they've decided not to swap it out for something more modern because it really seems to fit the piece. It's not this typical drop or bail type of hardware. It's got really cool pulls on each side. And I just think it fits so well. But when I take these drawers out, they're definitely wanting to be in their spot. So I'm just showing there that I am numbering them. And I had already done that. So each drawer has a number because I'll be taking these in and out, and they need to go back where they belong. Time to get this out. I'm looking at it and I'm a little perplexed because a lot of times these have these tiny little nails and this one did not. So I was like, not quite sure how this is going to come out. So very carefully, I'm getting my 5-in-1 tool underneath it and just going to see what's going to happen when I try to pry it. Because I'm looking for those nails, but no nails. So this does finally pop out and it's just got it just fits right into that spot. So it's been custom fitted into a couple of holes and it looks like just pressure sits in there. Time for some stripping. We're going to use lacquer thinner. Now I went to lacquer thinner because if I had used traditional stripper on this, with so many variations to the surface, I don't think I could scrape it very well. So what I've got here is like a rough pot scrubber. And my little jar there is just full of lacquer thinner that's got a bunch of lacquer in it, so it's orange. It is normally clear. So what I'm just going to do is take my pot scrubber or dip it in the lacquer thinner, scrub it around, and it just melts the surface. It melts that finish that's on there. And then I just wipe it away with a paper towel. This is very time consuming, and this is where the elbow grease part of this comes in. But as you can see now, it kind of melts it. It makes it goopy, and you wipe it off. And if you let it sit for very long, it dries, and now you've got thick, goopy, and it dries again. So while you're doing this and you've got it liquid, you've got to make sure you wipe it away. Otherwise, you got to get it wet again and then start over. So it's just layers, melt it off, make it goopy, wipe it away. But I am making some progress here. I did get out my putty knife because I found if I poured some on there and let it sit and get goopy, I could kind of scrape it off. And then this area is kind of a little bit of a trough where that burled wood inset in that little inlay. So I'm just pouring a little bit of it in there to let it sit there, get kind of goopy. And then I'll scrape it or rub it off, wipe it off. I mean, that couldn't go any better. This is very time consuming, but I was so worried I was going to have to sand all of that and I didn't want to damage it. Now, this is a heavily distressed piece by the manufacturer, so it does have all those variations, but I think you can really tell the difference between the intentional distressing and damage caused by over sanding. So I wanted to be really careful with this. But that really is getting into all those areas. So the idea with the lacquer thinner is to just get the majority of it off of there. And I've got to use the corner of my putty knife to get down in those edges. I think you can really see now all of those wood these pieces that are going across are raised. And so there's like triangles all over the place, and it's very interesting, but doesn't make it a surface that you can either scrape or sand. And the areas that are raised are kind of concave, so I can't just sand those either. It's going to be interesting on the finishing product here, but I've got most of that center area stripped. Pretty happy with how that's coming out so far. Now time to work on the edges, and I thought, oh, that's going to be flat. I'll get out my carbide scraper and just scrape that off, but no, that didn't work very well either. So I'm going to just start working on this curved area here, again with the lacquer thinner to make it kind of goopy because it gets sort of sticky and everything, and it's easier to scrape away, and then I'm using my putty knife to scrape more of it. But what I'm finding is underneath that surface, I don't know if you can tell, but that color variation is not looking like wood. And as I remove more and more of this, I'm finding out that that doesn't look like wood. See how white it is? That is not, I don't think that's wood. So we're going to investigate a little bit further. That brown area was just an area that was done by the manufacturer, the distressing. So I get up my sander and I'm going to see if I can sand through whatever that is. I'm like, is that a type of primer and then they stained over it, or what is it? And I do some sanding just to start figuring that out. And as I'm getting through that cream colored stuff, I find out that this indeed is MDF. You see how rough it is? That is essentially pressed cardboard. Even though this is a very high-end piece made by Hooker, these areas are commonly MDF because they're molded. So those molded curved areas are made out of MDF, and then they put the veneer on everything else. So what they did was they covered the MDF with that thick layer of something that protected it so they could stain over the top of it. And that's why it's got a dark stain. So you couldn't do a really super light stain on this, but I'm finding that those corner pieces on the cabinet are also the same thing. And that is going to just completely change the design of what we were about to do. My clients wanted to see if we could strip the entire piece, bleach the entire piece, and it all just changed just like that. So, I'm keeping her completely updated along the way with I found something that, oh no, what are we going to do now? And I'm just, giving her information, and we're trying to make decisions. So right now, while we're figuring some things, I'm going to keep sanding because I still have a lot of sanding to do. Really, with the lacquer thinner, it was just getting through the thick areas, but I've got to get now this big rounded contour block. I've wrapped a sandpaper sponge around it, and these are those areas I was saying they're kind of concave. So sander doesn't get in there very well. This is going to be done by hand. The edges, of course, I can do, but I've got it pretty well stripped in this area, and I want to put some mist on it. This is just water to see how is this reacting now that it's stripped. And it's reacting like I thought it would. It's just going to turn yellow and orange. Pretty typical. So the sanded area, and that's the area that is stripped but wet. All right, so at least now we know that this is not going to be wood that we can just strip and seal. Going to have to keep working on it. But I need to get the rest of it stripped and sanded. So I've got a sponge on my surf prep, and that did a lot of it. But all of these areas where, in the triangles and things, I've got to do them all by hand. Because you can see this when you get into the edges. If I could zoom in, I can't get close enough without it getting blurry. But those edges along each one of those squares, kind of in the triangle area, you can see a complete line of stain. So I have to get in there with sandpaper by hand just to continue scraping that out. Stripping pieces are never like just, oh, put some stripper on there and take it right off. There's always some kind of challenge that comes with it. Getting stain out of those little areas. So I got out a different scraper. This one has a point on it because I've got to get down in that area right there. The stain is just down in there. It's not smooth at all. I could put a piece of sandpaper down in there, so I'm scraping the stain out and then sanding it down smooth. So if I don't, it's just going to look weird to have this really dark line right there. All right, one last sand across the entire piece, and now we're going to start bleaching. So this is a 2-part wood bleach, and you can use household bleach, but household bleach doesn't quite do what true wood bleach does. Because this is a 2-part process, this penetrates the wood and it's actually removing tannins. It's a much more even type of bleach. So if you really want to bleach your piece, although some household bleach will do some, this definitely is the way to go. So you put this first one on here and you let it sit. And you have to follow the instructions. So it's a very specific period of time to let it sit. I think it was 15 minutes. And then you come in with part B. And you can almost see them working. So they're, obviously a chemical process. And you can see the color variation already once you put the part B on there. It's happening, starting to happen already. And it needs to completely dry before you can do it again. So I did let this dry overnight. I did an entire bleach cycle again with both parts, and here we are. So this has been bleached twice. Can you even believe the difference? I'll pop a little picture up here of where it started, and it's amazing what wood bleach does. But remember, we've got to do a little test when I get done here with this sanding, because another thing, when you put wood bleach on, you're raising the grain. So it is going to feel a little grainy and you've got to sand it down smooth. So I'm going to put some water on it and see, okay, how much did it really affect it? And yes, it lightened it quite a bit, but I'm still getting too much yellow. My client wanted a little bit of warmth, but she wants it to look like it does when it's dry on the left. And so we've got to paint wash it. So we went through several colors. Chose one of the lighter colors, and I'm mixing my paint wash to be a 5 and 1. So I've got different size syringes, and I'm doing 10 mLs of paint to 50 mLs of water. So that's a 5 and 1 ratio. And one of my little jars there just has water in it. So now I'm putting the 50 mLs of water in it. The reason I measure it is because if I run out and I need to mix more, it needs to be the same color. Okay, and with this paint wash, I'm just going to paint it on here. I've got a poly brush, and I'm going to put it on kind of thick because I don't want any parts of it to start drying out before I start wiping it back. I find that if I just put it on the entire surface and then start wiping, it's much more even. Otherwise, if I put some on and I wipe it off and then I go to do the next area, it's completely uneven because I've got some places that have overlapped, and I just find it's not as even. So I put it over the whole surface and then I start wiping back. And I like to use a soft towel instead of paper towels to do this. And I just, as soon as I'm done here, I go rinse all that off. It comes right off of my cloth, so it doesn't ruin it. But I think that the soft cloth just gives me a more even tone of everything, because you can completely wipe this back and make it really streaky and stuff depending on how you take it off. But I want to get a really even wash on this. And we don't want it to look whitewashed. So here it is. Now that's wet. I'm going to sit it out in the sun and let that dry. And now this is dried for several hours. So I'm going to test it out with my water just to see where we are. And it didn't change color. I didn't even need to wipe it, but I was just looking at it going, that's not changing color. I think we are there. I was FaceTiming my client this whole time, and we're talking about how the color's changing and what it's looking like, and she was really happy with it. So although we had to change our plan a couple of times here, now we know where we're headed. So I'm just getting the entire piece scuff sanded, because now that we're not stripping the entire piece, we're going to be painting it. But I have to address this MDF that I've exposed. So again, being that that is MDF, which is cardboard, I cannot just go and throw primer on it and, like I normally would the rest of the piece, because that's going to just swell. I have to seal that in with something oil-based so that I can continue. So I'm going to use my bin shellac, and I've taped everything off on the top because I don't want to get any on my top, and I'm going to do several coats of that. But in the meantime, I'm having a FaceTime consultation with my client about color, because now that we have the top a certain color, we want the paint to really coordinate, because she wanted a really uniform look. And so I'm just getting out all of my color swatches, custom paints that I've done, and what's going to match this top. And we come up with natural wicker. This is a Benjamin Moore color. It really matched the top of that very well. So I've got one coat of shellac primer on there, and it's still very rough. I'm sanding that smooth, just like I would do normally. Sand it smooth, another layer. I really got to get that sealed in. I let that dry, and taking off the masking. Thankfully, I didn't get any primer on my top. Time to set up my little Wagner tent. When I'm just doing a single piece, I set up a little tent. I know a lot of times in my videos you'll see me set up the giant 12 by 12. I didn't need it here, so just the little tent. Got to get it all dusted out. I love my leaf blower for this. Into the tent we go. And why am I putting this in the tent now when we're right in the middle of something? I'm getting it all dusted off because I need to put top coat on this top. I want to put clear on the top because I tint the rest of the top coat that goes over paint, but I want us to do lots and lots of layers of top coat. My client was very concerned about this not being durable, and so I'm going to make sure that, I did 5 layers of top coat on the top. I'm also going to take some time to tape the inside. The way that these drawers sit in there, it leaves quite a gap. And I'm afraid that if I don't tape all of this off, I'm not going to get clean lines, and the inside of my cabinet is going to have some overspray in it, which I don't like. If you were to take a drawer out, I want it to look very neat and clean and nice straight lines. And because the back of this is wood and it's beautiful, I'm also masking off the back. Okay, that top coat had some time to dry, so I'm going to do this many times. I'm going to sand in between coats, and then I'm going to come back in and wipe it off. More top coat. And then I just do this multiple times. Okay, after the 5 layers of top coat, this is the next day. And I am now masking off the top. And this is quite a process because this is very distressed. So these edges are not clean lines. It's so wobbly, they've been pounded on and hacked up a bit just to look really distressed. You're like, what kind of which line do I follow? So I'm putting my tape on there, and I'm using an X-Acto knife to try to create an edge that's going to give me a clean paint line. And I'm just kind of doing my best to, especially in the areas that are real pounded, to try to figure out which line to use. But I do get all of that on there, masked off. Time for the tent again. And here we go. Now this time we're switching it up. I'm going to be painting the body of the dresser. So I'm going to start with my primer. I don't like to pour out of gallons, so I have a protein powder scoop, and I do my primer, add some water to it to thin it. Once I get it how I want it, time to go. Putting on primer. I use Stix primer. It is tinted gray. I think the gray gives me better coverage over the surface, and even though I am painting a very light color, I still like the gray as a good base because we're going from a really dark, and if I step from all the way from that dark color all the way to white paint, I feel like I can still see underneath it, but when I put the gray on first, my paint doesn't have to work so hard to cover all those areas. So I've got my primer on, I'm going to set my fan up, and I'm going to leave that for a couple of hours. Once that dries really well, again, sanding by hand. I've got a sponge in my hand that you can't really see, but that way I can get all these rounded areas. It doesn't take much to really knock down it feels a little sandy after these first couple of coats, but it doesn't take a lot to knock all that down and make this really smooth. But this is a really important step. And now you can see the difference between my gray primer and the paint. And the paint is not really white. Remember that natural wicker is an off-white, a light beige. But now we've got good coverage from going all the way to the dark wood to this pink color. I think that's going to coordinate so nicely with the top. So I think a really good color choice. All right, now we're in between coats. This has dried. I don't mess with these until it actually dries really well. And I'm just touching up the tops and sides of the drawers with the same paint. And I'm using it straight out of the can. This is not the diluted version that's in my sprayer. I just get better coverage with it when I'm brushing on to use what's right out of the can. And I'm going to take the drawers out, and now I'm cleaning up those lines. So, I put the tape on earlier, and now I'm just going to make sure that everything's painted on the inside as well. At the very end, when I pull the tape, you'll see what I'm talking about and why I taped all that off. I do the bottom and the sides there of the cabinet. And then these areas you would think, oh, you're using a sprayer. That would be perfect to get into some of these details. But the sprayer doesn't always get down deep into that because you'd have to spray so much paint to do it. So I find that if I just touch that up in between coats, that is really nice too, to get those details by hand. I also do the bottoms of the drawers while I have them out. So that I've got all four sides all touched up, looking beautiful. After everything dries, it goes back in, another coat of paint. This is a lighter color that's going over dark, and so I ended up doing that, sanding it again. I did another coat of paint. I forgot to film that one. But now that I'm done with my paint, I'm going to pour it back in its can, and I'm putting Topcoat directly in my sprayer canister with that paint residue still in there, and it will essentially tint my Topcoat. It just stabilizes the top coat more to have the paint color in there, and I'm dialing back the flow. I cannot spray this layer as thick as you can spray paint. It will run. So I would rather do multiple layers of top coat than have to put them on there thick and risk getting eggshell or drips. Sand in between coats, do it again. I did this over and over. I'm also putting some top coat, and this is tinted top coat. This is out of the canister. I'm doing the edges with it. So that got painted and top coated. And then I did another layer of top coat just to tie it all together. Now I'm pulling my tape off the edges, taking those drawers out and pulling this tape. Everything inside my dresser is nice and clean. Those lines are straight. Take the backing off. That was all protected. If you want it to look really professional, you just have to keep all of these things nice and clean. Because if you have overspray going everywhere, it just doesn't look very good. And pulling the tape off the top. This is the one where you're like, oh, you can finally breathe a little bit. I didn't get any paint on this area, but I did all the top coat first because if I did get a little paint on there, it's so much easier to correct if you've got a bunch of top coat on there. Okay, so remember those areas that are all distressed and the edges where I was taping? I was like, I don't love where the tape kept the paint, so I'm going to just touch up a little bit of that by hand, and then I top coated it as well. Now, you can see where my tape was, so that was going to ruin my dovetails had I not taped it. But now I can see the overspray on the sides of the drawers, and I don't like that either. Rubbing alcohol is your friend, and it just takes that right off. Time to put the hardware on. I'm glad this hardware is going back on. It just fits this piece so well. And let's take a look back at where we started. And this is where we are. So, oh my goodness, what a change. This piece has come so far. And now it's just the light and bright and airy, beautiful piece. It still has all the charm and character of that distressed look, but so light and modern and beautiful. I hope you like it, and be sure to follow for more.